Today's time may have its disadvantages. Not everyone gets along, there is more and more terrorism, and ultimately life in America keeps changing. For better or worse is your opinion. One thing most people can agree on, however, is the change in America's direction following the Civil Rights era. The generation growing up today hardly even sees the difference between black and white, besides the few that were raised to do so. This time not only changed things for the African American community, but for many others as well, including the way that women were being perceived. It changed life all around us. It affected art, sports, music, fashion, medical discoveries, political issues, and that's just the beginning. But where did it all begin? Okay.
So first off, what is your name and what year were you born?
My name is Bill Brandon. I was born in December of 1945.
Okay. So today we're going to ask you some questions regarding what was going on from 1950 and 1970.
For me, it was a great time growing up. But if you're talking about the civil rights part of it, I lived in a very segregated world. There were only white people in my neighborhood. There were only white people in my school. I didn't even really realize that there was any kind of any problems going on. I didn't dislike anybody. I didn't hate anybody. I wasn't prejudiced against anyone. But I never met anybody until my senior in high school. I moved to Fayetteville, Arkansas. And Fayetteville High School is integrated. And so for the first time I went to school with blacks and Hispanics, but mainly blacks. Small minority then. I had no problem with it. And there wasn't any racial tension that I saw. The tension came later at the University of Arkansas, mid to late 60s. The civil rights movement had kind of started, and Arkansas was a little late in entering that, but there were a few protests at the University of Arkansas before I graduated, but not many. And I went to the Air Force, and that was completely integrated. And, we never made any difference between, color didn't matter in the Air Force, to me anyway, and to people I knew.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Many people think it all started in 1963 when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his utmost famous speech that we still talk about today. They wouldn't be wrong in assuming that Dr. King had a major role in the movement and was definitely a leader of sorts. However, the fight for freedom actually began long before that. We can really take it all the way back to the beginning of time, but let's start with the 1950s. 1951. In 1951, a little girl by the name of Linda Brown becomes involved in one of the biggest Supreme Court cases to this date, Brown versus the Board of Education. She was 8 years old and lived in Topeka, Kansas. Every day she would take a bus to a distant school for African American children, even though there was a perfectly good school within walking distance of her house. The problem? The closer school was for whites only. Her father ended up suing the school board of Topeka, and the U.S. Supreme Court agreed to hear the case. This was a big part of the beginning of this movement, and in 1954 it was declared that state-sanctioned school segregation was a violation of the 14th Amendment. Just think of your everyday life. For people who weren't even born back then, it's hard to believe that this just wasn't always the case. 1955. Let's jump ahead to a year after the ending of the Brown v. Board case. 1955 was a pretty important year as well, particularly the last couple months of it. In November, the Federal Interstate Commerce Commission forbade segregation on interstate buses and trains. In December, Rosa Parks famously refused to give up her seat to a white passenger on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. And also in December, the Montgomery Improvement Association is established by a group of local Baptist ministers. The organization decides to elect Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. as pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. As you probably already know, Dr. King used this position to help lead the boycott.
Well, I was not in this environment. I was in an environment when I transferred schools in 7th grade. I went to just a normal school, I don't know what you call it, public school. We weren't in private schools anymore. The population where we moved, which was Silver City, New Mexico, was 75% Hispanic and 25% white. So different ethnicities, but kind of the same makeup as Bible is. Was there problems or was there still segregation? Not so much in that school at that time. And this was in 72, 73 area.
Quoting HuffPost, "These are the artists of the Civil Rights Movement" by Catherine Brooks. She says, throughout the 1960s, a decade marked by an ardent civil rights fight that swept the American nation, many artists find themselves on the side of a burgeoning protest movement. From assemblage artists to minimalist masters to pop art figures, those working in a wide breadth of media turned to art as an act of political defiance. They painted, sculpted, and photographed to comment on the social turmoil that surrounded them, creating visual symbols of resistance, liberation, and empowerment. Another article by HuffPost called "An Illustrative Identity of Fashion and Style Throughout the African American History and Movements" says, "Fashion throughout history has created an illustrative identity within African American history. Fashion is a statement and speaks volumes with little to no words. Within the black community, everything from cloth to churches to the forming of political movements and hair has elements of style." An article by Sports in Black and White called "The Role of Sports Upon the Civil Rights Movement" says, "When examining the advancement of the civil rights movement throughout sports, one must first begin with the people who made change happen. Whether it was a conscious stand or unintentional advocacy, athletes and coaches throughout the past century used their participation in sports to change the racial atmosphere in our country. They moved our nation forward into a new way of thinking, and without them we may not enjoy the relative equality we experience today. Such work was not easy. However, these figures overcame countless obstacles and underwent much suffering to emerge as the heroes they are today."
What was it like growing up during segregation and the civil rights movement?
What was it like? That's a good question. It was confusing because I, for one, couldn't understand why there was such a disparity between people because of their skin color. I couldn't understand that. And I was young, but I never could understand that. And I can remember going to the sale barn with my grandfather. My grandfather was a cattleman. He bought and sold cattle for a living. And I can remember traveling with him to the sale barn in Mississippi. And when we would go into the arena where they would sell the cattle, they had an area where white people had to sit and they had an area where black people had to sit. And I couldn't go over there and sit with them, and they couldn't come over and sit with us. You had to sit in different places. That was very confusing to me, because some of the men that my grandfather sold cattle to and bought cattle from were black people, but we couldn't sit together, and I never did understand that. They would even have different places for us to eat in restaurants. In fact, some restaurants, black people couldn't even go in the restaurant, and I never could understand that. Different bathrooms for white people and black people, and I never could understand that. So it was really confusing for young people like I was, because I just didn't understand why that was all happening. And then when you would watch on television, you would see lots of people, white and black people, marching in protest, because we didn't think this was right, and we thought that it should be fixed. And so it was kind of stressful, kind of tense, and very confusing. That's kind of what it was like.
An article by Library of Congress called Music in the Civil Rights Movement says, African American spirituals, gospel, and folk music all played an important role in the Civil Rights Movement. Singers and musicians collaborated with ethnomusicologists and song collectors to disseminate songs to activists, both at large meetings and through publications. They sang these songs for multiple purposes: to motivate them through long marches, for physiological strength against harassment and brutality, and sometimes to simply pass the time when waiting for something to happen. An article by Circulating Now called The Medical Civil Rights Movement and Access to Healthcare says, the brilliant Dr. Edwards faces many trials as he battles the prejudices of white physicians and patients. He even opens a secret clinic in the hospital's basement to treat African American patients who had been turned away upstairs and by other hospitals. The Nick is perhaps the first television series to so powerfully depict not only racial discrimination in the medical profession, but also the denial of care based on race, a tragic but central fact of U.S. healthcare history.
Okay, Ernest, what was your question?
Was it hard for you growing up, baby?
So related to your childhood, was it hard growing up then, during that era, the 50s through the 70s? What was it like for you? Even if you weren't a child, what was that era like for you? Anybody take it?
I was a child in 1950, and I did the 50s because I was born in 1939. Okay, I finished Harrison High School here in Blytheville in 1955. Was it hard? I didn't know it was hard. Probably my life was hard, but I didn't know it because I had parents who tried to do for me what your parents are doing for you, and that's provide the best that we can for our children. I believe that each generation is supposed to be get easier and won't be as hard for the parents to make a living, which means that you'll have a better life. And I'm sure that I had a hard life, but my parents made it seem like everything was fine because they were there trying to do everything that they could for me, just as your parents are trying to do for you. They wanted me to have a good education. They wanted me to go off to college and do some of the same things that your parents are probably telling you today.
I agree with Miss McDonald because she said she was born in
39.
I was born in 41, which was not too far apart. And I think what really made things easier than you thought it would be, because you were given a mindset, and that mindset was, this is the way life is, and you adhere to it. You know, your mom and dad told you every day, you know, you go to school, you behave, you do your work, and don't mess with them other folks. Oh boy.
And look, when I grew up in Blytheville, even though he's talking on his phone, I'll probably be talking on mine in a minute. Even though I grew up in Blytheville, even though I taught at Blytheville High School, I had no earthly idea about this school because where I went to school was down on Elm Street, the Harrison School, which was the all-black school, okay? I didn't even know anything about this school. In my neighborhood, we had a neighborhood grocery store that a white man owned this neighborhood grocery store. He had children, they lived in the back of the store, but I had no idea where those kids went to school, okay? And after school, we would see them, basically we would play together, but I had no idea where they went to school or anything about this school except the Bible school board let the black kids come up here to play football. I think we played like either a Thursday night or we played Thursday night up at Haley Field. And when we came to Haley Field to play football with other teams from out of town, we weren't allowed to go over on the west side, where the bleachers are on the west side. We were not allowed to go over on that side at all. We were not allowed to sit on that side. So when we and the teams that were our opponents, all of us sat on the east side because these were the rules of the school board. Look, and I tell you a crazy story. When I went to school, in this little school at Harrison High School on McHaney and Elm Street, we had a building that classes 1 through 12 were in. Well, as time went on, that school got crowded. I mean, just packed and jammed. Looked like kids were hanging all outside the windows and everything. But listen to this. The school board, the black parents, said, we need a new building. We need a new school. The school board made a deal with the black parents and told them, if you all raise the money to buy the land, we'll build a school. Can you imagine a group of parents getting together to buy the land and the school board saying, if you buy the land, we'll build a school? So the school board didn't even buy the land for the school that basically they built a building on. The black parents did. You know what we did as students? They would take us out by classes, 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade. And when I say out, they took us out to the cotton field. And we picked cotton. And when we paid for picking cotton that day, that money went into a fund to buy this building, to buy this land for this school. So the black parents raised the money for this school to be built, and the black students pitched in. And the black students pitched in by picking cotton to build a building. Probably that part of school history you'll never be told. But that's how that building got down there that you call the AMOD building or the Boys and Girls Club or whatever. That's how that building was built.
I would like to say that my life was a little bit different. I'm the daughter of a sharecropper, and maybe you know what that means. We lived on a white man's farm, and in exchange for living on that land, my father would get so many acres and we would work it. And for the most of the part, we wouldn't get any money to the end of the year when they sell the crops. And if the crops were good, then they would make some extra money. If not, and most of the time, my father was indebted to the man that owned the land, where he borrowed money to buy groceries. I lived part of my life in a 3-room house, 11 people in there. I had 4 sisters and 4 brothers, and slept in bed with 5 of us in one bed. And we go to the table, and sometimes supper was where my mama had took, excuse me, some water and sugar. And fried salt pork, and that was supper. She would cook the boil of water and sugar till it turned into syrup, and then she would take the flour, make some biscuits, and then we would have the pork, and we would eat that. We never went to bed hungry, but we didn't have the best of food. Thank you. Y'all excuse me. My mama just died a few months ago, so that's the thing too. But we were poor, and most people around us was poor and didn't know it. Where I grew up in Dale, Arkansas, 9 miles west of here, they only had 3 schools back during that era. They had 2 elementary schools, 1 black and 1 white. They had only 1 high school, and that was for the whites. So my dad and mama my mother's from Mississippi, so my dad and mama My dad had a 6th grade education and my mom had a 10th grade education. So all they knew was the fields, and all they knew was to tell us the importance of working and working hard and trying to do better so we can have better. And I mean, I lived in a house sometime during the winter months. You could lay in the bed and look outdoors. And, you know, and that's why I do everything now to try to make life better for everybody else. And so, but there were some good people that treated us good, because there were some people that loaned my dad money so we could have food during the winter months when he couldn't work in the fields. And when I finished the 8th grade, there were no high schools for blacks. But during that time, they had passed a law that all students were entitled to a public education. So they had to obey the laws of the land. And so, but still they didn't build, we wasn't fortunate like Mrs. McDonald and somebody built the school. They would put us on a bus. Yes. There was 9 miles west of here. And they would put us on a bus, and they would drive us here to the school that Mrs. McDonald just finished talking about. And then when school is over, we get on this bus and we go back. I put on some red shoes. I looked down at my shoes a while ago, and I put red shoes on with black and white skirt on, whatever. And I wanted to say this because I think this is something that's happening in 2017. I dressed like, I put a flower blouse on and a plaid skirt on one day because I had nothing else to put on. We didn't have indoor plumbing. We had to go outdoors to a toilet. We had to pump our own water. We had to put it in buckets and carry it into the house. And I was 18, other than coming to Harrison, that's the only time we had indoor plumbing when I was at Harrison, before we go to school, use the bathroom at school. But the other time I grew up without indoor plumbing. And I remember my most memorable day, and I think about it a lot. They talked about me all day long. I was in a class, and they would have different grades in here. And they were talking about why she got that on, and she should have put something else on. And I wanted to turn around and tell those 2 students that was talking about me that I didn't have anything else to put on. And I thought if I tell them that, they just gonna laugh at me no more. I had a plaid skirt on and a flower blouse. 2017, y'all wearing all kind of stuff together. But I didn't know that I was gonna be I was a trendsetter back then, you know. But it didn't feel good when they was talking about me. It hurt my feelings because we couldn't do any better than what we were doing. But education is important. And that's why I strive every day of my life to make a difference in somebody's life. If I don't do anything but speak to somebody, try to encourage him or her to make them feel better.
I'm not from Mississippi County. I'm from Arkansas County. I was raised in a little town called DeWitt, Arkansas, which is 25 miles to the west of Stuttgart. You probably heard of Stuttgart. And we had some times where, most of the time we had to chop and pick cotton. And we had a school year which we call split term. You probably never heard of it, but maybe you have.
I have. We did.
You have?
Yes, sir, we sure did.
We had split term, and since Arkansas County was an agricultural area, you know, cotton, rice, beans, they knew we had to get out and work and chop and pick cotton. There was a lot of them still sharecroppers because there was kids all around. And we had split term school, which means we'd go to school, well, when school ended in May, we'd go back to school in July. Because what we were trying to do was coordinate when the cotton would be ready to chop. And then when it was ready to chop, they let us out of school. School would close. And we chopped for about 4 to 6 weeks. Then we go back to school. Then it was time to pick. They let us out of school again to pick it. So that's why they call it split term. Because they knew if we didn't do it that way, if they had not that process, our parents might keep us out of school anyway and all survive. So, and I was really shocked when I came to Mississippi County, and you all didn't have this.
Well, they had it out in the rural area. They had split term out in the rural area. They had split term. Yeah. We had the regular term, but if you lived out where she lived in Dale. But look, Miss James, before you caught that school bus, the kids from Dale would walk. Would walk from Dale, and the kids, they would meet the kids down there, Mississippi Avenue, Bill Street, Boone Street, back in there. And they would walk from Dale and catch up with these kids, and then all these kids would then walk over to Elm and McHaney. But I remember when there was no bus, for the black kids anyway.
That's where a lot of them didn't go
They didn't come to high school because there was no transportation to get them off the farms to come. And sometimes the families on the farms would pitch in, and some family would get a car. And they would put all the kids from Burdett in this car. So we had a group of kids in my class that came from Burdett in a car, because there was no school bus for black kids to come to school. And then some of them, like from Dale and some of those country areas. And then some people let their kids come to town and live with different people, different family members, so they could get the high school education.
Well, I grew up, born in the 1960s. Went to the Catholic school. It's now closed. It's on the corner across from Jordan's. Main and Division. Next, I went to West. Because my mother was a teacher, I had a choice to go between East and West. I hated every day I was at West. Everybody I played with was on, y'all call it the East Side? They used to be Sawdust Bottom. That's what the name used to be. Yeah. I ain't like a day at West. So all my buddies went East. I had an older brother. I think he kind of messed it up for me. He had some friends. They kicked it a little bit too much. So I couldn't go to West because my mother was a teacher here. So I had to come down here to go to school. Then I graduated. I'm a graduate of Blythe High. 1980, class of 1980. Class president the junior year. My junior year, I was a class president. Did I have a rough life? Nah, I didn't. Not because of, I don't know what y'all would consider rough, but I didn't. Because I had two parents that worked, well, grandparents that worked. My biggest thing was, how do I not get her mad that she don't tell my father who would whoop my butt at the drop of a hat? Okay? He was believing this, and he believed in that, but he also believed in school and education. I didn't have a tough life because my parents worked. My toughest thing was figuring out what I need to do to keep them off me so I could do what I wanted to do. But it was good. I mean, as a kid, I didn't want some things I wanted, didn't miss anything, never went hungry. If it wasn't because of, if I went hungry, it's because I did, that was my choice. But it was instilled in me to do better than my parents and to exceed what they have done. Have I surpassed them? Some areas I have. Am I smarter than them? I'll never be smarter than my parents. Never. Because they figured out a way how to take care of me and my brother. I don't care how many degrees I get, what I do in my life, I'll never be smarter than those folks. So did I have a hard life? No, I had a good one. Because I remember, y'all called it, first it was named Southside Park. I used to play in that park. We used to go play in that park every day. Now they called it Williams Park. But back to me, it was Southside Park. We knew everybody in the neighborhood. Y'all ever hear you folks talk about the folks in the neighborhood? Man, Miss James seen me do something wrong. Mr. Jenkins seen me do something wrong. I was in for it. They had the green light to discipline me. They would call my mother. I didn't know where my father would pop up. Oh, it was on then. You know, but this is what I'm saying. I had a real good life growing up. You know, so.
The question was, did we have a rough life? And we've everybody here has said the same thing. It wasn't, it was, but it wasn't, and we didn't know that it was. And it's different as all of our lives may have been. My dad too was a sharecropper. We had split term school where I was 10 miles from town. I lived out in the country because my dad was a sharecropper too. And we had split term, but the people in town, which was not a very big town, but they didn't have. So, but yes, we chopped cotton and picked cotton as well, and we didn't have much money. I didn't know it was a rough life. I didn't think it was a rough life. And in comparison, there were things that were so much better than others, and then there would be things that would be worse than others. My own biological children, I say that because my kids are all, whatever kids I've ever had are my kids, but my own biological children would think that I had a rough life. You knew you'd answer your phone. I think it's real interesting to see, as different as this panel may be, there are still some similarities, and I really appreciate it. I appreciate knowing that.
The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was put into place in, 1964. This was a big win for not only the African American community, but anyone that was being discriminated by race, color, sex, religion, or national origin. Though there would be more battles to fight, more protests to take place, and a lot more love to be given, America began a step in the right direction. Even if we still face problems in the world today, we have now learned to solve them together.